From News Channel 4, this is a special presentation, Decision 2005, the New York City mayoral debate.
My friends, there are two New Yorks.
This is not the time, I would argue, to change direction.
Tonight's debate is jointly sponsored by NBC4, Telemundo 47, and the Campaign Finance Board, an independent, nonpartisan city agency charged with running the New York City Campaign Finance Program. Candidates in the program get public matching funds as long as they limit their contributions, their spending, and fully disclose their finances. Mayor Bloomberg is financing his own campaign. Those in the program are required to debate on media outlets selected by the board. Now, your moderator, senior correspondent, Gabe Pressman.
Good evening and welcome to our viewers and to the candidates running for mayor. They are Michael Bloomberg, the incumbent and Republican Party nominee, and Fernando Ferrer, the challenger and Democratic nominee. Joining in the questioning are political reporter Jay DeDapper, government affairs reporter Melissa Russo, WNBC anchor David Ushery, and Telemundo 47 anchor Jorge Ramos. Now to the debate. We ask both gentlemen to keep your answers concise. If necessary to avoid a filibuster, I'll hold a stopwatch on you. There'll be rebuttals as necessary and follow-up questions as we see fit. Okay, the first question now from Melissa Russo.
Thank you, Gabe. Good evening. Mr. Mayor, as a Republican in this city of Democrats, you like to say that you're basically a nonpartisan kind of guy and that there's no Republican or Democratic way to pick up the garbage. But you've also contributed millions of dollars to Republicans, even though you admit that some of their policies are out of step with and even harmful in some cases to New York City. Most recently, the sweeping protections for the gun industry. This political tightrope subjects you to criticism, like the following cartoon released yesterday by your opponent.
There's one thing for certain, I'll love you till I die.
Now, Mr. Mayor, is this ad really unfair and disgusting, as your campaign called it, or are you trying to have it both ways at a time when this country is bitterly divided along partisan lines?
Melissa, I don't know that comic books really are very important in this election. We should be talking about real issues. The monies that I've given, most of the monies I've given, with the same organization I gave to that the New York Times did, a nonprofit organization that was set up to finance the convention that came to this town, and we would have done the same thing for the Democrats. What I've tried to do with my own money is give money where I think people can help New York, whether it's in Washington or Albany or in New York City. But this really is about getting the schools better. This is really about improving social services. This is really about making this city safer. And as you said yourself, there is no partisan ways to really do that. We have to deal with everybody, and we're going to try to get help from everybody.
Mayor, do you believe that that ad is disgusting, as your campaign is quoted as saying in today's paper?
That's the first time I've seen the ad, so I saw about 2 seconds of it earlier today. I didn't see the whole thing.
And just one quick follow-up. Why not just admit that you're a Republican by label only, if that's what you want New Yorkers to believe?
Well, I don't know that I want them to believe that. I believe in some things in the Republican Party. I believe in some things in the Democratic Party. The Republican Party gave me an opportunity that the Democratic Party would not give me. And it was a chance to change this city. It's a chance to leave a better world for my kids, and I took advantage of it.
Mr. Ferrer, do you really expect New Yorkers to believe that Mayor Bloomberg is a right-wing Republican after 4 years in office serving New York City? And isn't it a good thing to maintain close ties with both parties if you're a mayor trying to get things done?
Oh, come on. I don't think there's anybody in America who, honest to God, believes that a $7.5 million contribution to the Republican National Convention is nonpartisan, or being one of the largest donors to George Bush and his party, a party that's promoted policies that hurt this city, that's avowedly anti-choice, anti-gun control, and pro-privatizing Social Security.
But has Mayor Bloomberg really governed as a conservative Republican, in your opinion?
Look, you can't disclaim responsibility for the policies while you're opening up your checkbook wide. Look, my grandmother had a saying about all this. Dime con quién andas y te diré quién tú eres. In English, that's tell me who you walk with and I'll tell you who you are. Mike, in 2 languages, you're a Republican.
Is that true? Are you a Republican?
Well, I did give $2,000 to George Bush. I gave more than that to Bill Clinton when he was running. I try to do what's right, and I'm going to continue to do that. If I think somebody can help us, I'm going to give them the money.
I'm not sure that was an answer, but we're going to move on. Mr. Ferrer, we'd like you to respond now to a new ad from the Bloomberg campaign.
Newspapers report that Ferreras flip-flopped on the death penalty, on abortion, flip-flopped on the homeowner tax rebate. Think about it. Ferreras flip-flopped on issue after issue after issue.
Freddie just flip-flops and flip-flops all over the place.
Is that true, Mr. Ferrer? Have you flip-flopped?
Sounds to me like an ad that George Bush ran against John Kerry. Look, people know who I am after 20 years of elected public office. But they know this about me. There's only one principle that's ever guided any decision I've ever made. And that is this, that every New Yorker who works hard and does right should get the tools they need to build a good life right here in this city.
Mayor, do you agree with what Mr. Ferrer just said, or has
Well,
he
I think
flip-flopped?
everybody does know what my opponent stands for. He stands for complaining. He stands for identifying problems and never coming up with solutions. And that's different than governing. It's easy to be a critic. It is very hard to lead. And this city is going in the right direction. And I think the policies that we've had for the last 4 years are the policies we should continue with.
Well, I'm glad to talk about those policies. Why don't you ask me a follow-up question?
Okay, I think we should move on to another subject. As I've visited neighborhoods around the city, I have found that Iraq is uppermost in the minds of many voters. My question to both of you is, do you think the next mayor should use his office as a bully pulpit to try to influence the federal government's policies on Iraq? Mr. Ferrer?
You bet I do. I mean, look, Mike Bloomberg has said previously that he didn't think the war in Iraq was a local issue. Explain that to 37 families who lost soldiers fighting in Iraq. Explain that to the people who watch us build firehouses in Baghdad while we're shutting them down in New York, or spending hundreds of millions, billions of dollars to promote that war instead of doing the things we need to do to promote decent and affordable housing, good schools, and health care.
What would you advocate for the president?
I'd advocate for the president to get our troops out of there as promptly as possible. Look, that's a war. I mean, they're still looking for weapons of mass destruction. And tell you the truth, it's a war that's cost too much in terms of human life, and it's cost too much in terms of our national wealth and the distortion of our national priorities.
Mr. Bloomberg, Mr. Mayor, do you agree with him that the war should be brought to an end as soon as possible?
Let's see why we're here, Gabe. There was a point where intelligence reported weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which could have threatened our country and destabilized the world. The Senate, our two senators, Senator Schumer, Senator Clinton, the president, most of the Congress thought that we should go in and get rid of those weapons of mass destruction. It turned out that there was a massive intelligence failure. But you're there. And now we've lost over 2,000 of our young men and women, 37 from New York City. Walking away at this point would make all of them having had died in vain. It would be an outrage. What we have to do is stay there until the generals say that Iraq's government can maintain peace and maintain a democracy. And in the meantime, we should continue to support our troops so that they can protect themselves and carry out the mission that we have asked them to do. Nobody's happy to be there.
Do you think, Mr. Mayor, that we were misled into that war?
I think there's no question that there was a catastrophic failure of the intelligence community.
And don't the young men and women who are serving there from New York, don't they deserve, Mr. Ferrer, to have their commander-in-chief respected while they're there?
Of course, they have every right and expectation to have the full support of the American people for themselves, for their bravery, for their sacrifice, for those who have made, those 2,000 who made the supreme sacrifice. But that doesn't make that war correct, and that doesn't make the predicate for that war true.
J.D. Dapper has a question.
I want to direct us back to New York City for a minute, and security, terrorism, a lot of things that have been on a lot of people's minds. You've both complained, along with nearly every other New York politician, about the amount of money that we get from Washington in Homeland Security funding. Police Commissioner Ray Kelly said a few weeks ago, and I want to show you this, this city isn't getting its fair share of Homeland Security money, and I think we have to continue to push the effort. So, Mr. Bloomberg, what would you do differently if we did get the money? What aren't we doing now that we could do if we got this money?
Ray Kelly's talking about security money. This city does not get its fair share from Washington. The state doesn't. Moynihan used to talk about that all the time. If we had more money, it would, number one, allow us to do other things. But what I've said is we are going to provide the security that we need regardless of cost. And then I'm going to go and find a ways to pay for it.
What other things could we do, though?
What we've done.
That's what I'm getting at. Is what other things could we do with the money if we got an extra billion or $2 billion?
We would use it to solve our other budgetary problems. But we bought every piece of equipment I think is necessary to protect this city. We have a police force of the size I think is necessary to protect this city. We give them the training that we believe is necessary so that they can come home safe at night to their families and protect this city. And we're going to continue to do that. And I have never looked at the cost of it when I've made a security decision. But we'd love to get more help from Washington.
Mr. Ferrer, you've said the same thing. You'd like to see more help from Washington. You don't think the mayor's done a good job in getting that money?
You know, it's as plain as day that we're not getting Homeland Security funds based on risk, based on the fact that New York City took it on the chin for the rest of America in the attack on 9/11. But let me give you a specific example of that. Some months ago at a subway station at Borough Hall in Brooklyn, I put forward a mass transit security plan because simple fact is, and I've criticized this mayor and his 4 appointees to the MTA board. Not any 4 appointees. They're 4 high-ranking members of Mike Bloomberg's cabinet. They sat there like potted plants when they failed to spend $390 million that were allocated to it to upgrade security in our mass transit system. Now, recently they got about to letting out a few contracts, and they managed to bungle that. Look, those $390 million were absolutely necessary. And not to install, as the mayor put it, a bunch of cameras, but to train MTA personnel in anti-terrorism and surveillance techniques, to install surveillance equipment, explosive detection technology, and to improve communication below ground and above ground.
David Ushery.
All right, Gabe, thank you. Gentlemen, earlier today, President Bush unveiled a $7.1 billion preparedness plan to confront an outbreak of the bird flu, the avian flu. But given the federal government's much criticized response to Hurricane Katrina, could you have confidence in the federal government's ability to help confront this outbreak? And we'll begin with you, Mr. Ferrer. What would you do as mayor to protect the city?
There's no question. We have to lobby them vigorously and strenuously to get all the help we need. But at the end, this is a city that must do for itself and must leave no one behind. And that's why in any one of our disaster preparedness plans, we have to prepare to such an extent that in the case of a hurricane, we leave no one behind in low-lying areas. That in the case of avian flu, we have enough vaccine stockpiled so that we can take care of New Yorkers, so that we can preserve life and safety.
The president had earlier mentioned the possibility of quarantining regions of the country, perhaps the city or beyond. Do you think the city should be prepared to do that?
I think the city's got to be prepared to fight avian flu, but I'm not ready to go as far as the president has. Of course, I don't think the president has any plans about this, and that's really the tragedy here.
Mr. Bloomberg, do you have confidence in the federal government's ability to help protect the city?
At the moment, we don't know what the risk is. What I'm first concerned about is to make sure that this year, for the kinds of flu that are around, we get everybody their flu shot. 35,000 Americans will die from flu this year if it tracks the other years. And I'm trying to make sure that the particularly vulnerable parts of our city, our seniors and our young children, get flu vaccine. In terms of down the road, we have plans. Everybody's got plans. Nobody knows yet whether there will be a vaccine available, invented, to prevent or to deal with avian flu that has yet to mutate into something that we've got to worry about. The federal government has shown again and again and again, they can help, they can give you money, but we have to be prepared locally. That was the lesson of 9/11. That was the lesson of Katrina. You have to be able to handle at a local level the problems. And whether it is quarantine or moving people, whether it is getting them vaccines, which we are incidentally practicing right now, using the incentive to get the current flu protection. We're going through and practicing how we would use for the avian flu.
Jorge Ramos.
Thank you, Gabe. One of the most pressing issues facing the city is how to improve education and how to get the money to do it. The city has been awarded billions in a lawsuit filed by the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, but the state has appealed that decision. A teacher in the Bronx has this question for both candidates. Please listen.
I'm a teacher at PS 62, and I would like to know, with all the money that the state of New York owes the city of New York, when are we going to get this money in order to help our children succeed? That's what I'd like to know. When is he going to fight for that?
So, Mayor Bloomberg, you have had exactly a year to get that money out of Albany, and some say you haven't fought hard enough. Specifically, what will you do if elected to get the billions the courts say are owed to the city of New York?
Well, keep in mind, I went and testified before the arbitrators panel. I went and had our corporation counsel argue in court to get this money. It is now tied up in the courts, and when we get the money, I've already put out a plan of how we would spend the $5.5 billion a year that we hope to get. But I haven't waited for that. What I've done is I've increased city spending on the schools by $2.5 billion. I've raised our school construction budget to $13.5 billion over 5 years, the biggest in history, splitting it with the state. And when the state didn't come through with the money, the city came up with the money. I'm not waiting for CFE money. We've given our teachers a 33% raise over the last 4 years. We've got to educate the kids of today. And when the money comes, we've laid out a plan. First priority will be pre-K, universal pre-K, but we're not sitting around waiting for it. In the meantime, just let's hope that the courts continue to rule our way as they have so far.
So, Mr. Ferrer, you have said the city must ante up some money in order to, quote, prime the pump. But if we are entitled to that money, why should we offer to pay?
Well, first of all, I congratulate the mayor for increasing the education budget. But if we've still got a 50% dropout rate, and I hope we talk about that at some point in this debate, then I would argue Mike Bloomberg, instead of doing more with less, is doing less with more. But let's talk about CFE. I was proud to be an early participant in that action. I was prouder still in the last 4 years to be a member of its board. They owe us money. They've been cheating the kids of this city, all 1.1 million of them, for years now. And I don't think you can approach this as a CEO in a negotiation by putting zero on the table and waiting for years for them to come up. In fact, it was the Corporation Council of this city, appointee of my opponent, who said this city will not spend a nickel. If we have to put up a nickel, no thanks. Well, very frankly, if you listen to the governor, the plaintiffs in the case, and the legislative leaders, they've all said this city will have to come up with something. I'm proud to have put forward a school investment plan that asks the global investment community for pennies to invest in our kids.
Your time is up, Mr. Ferrer. Jay DeDapper.
You were very prescient in your last statement, Mr. Ferrer. We are going to talk about the dropout rate. There's a lot of confusion about this, dropout rate versus graduation rate. I want to show you what Joel Klein said on this station, his school's chancellor, Joel Klein, on this station in September 2004 on News Forum. Gabe Pressman was moderating, and he asked, what's the dropout rate now? Joel Klein, very simply, in practical terms or in statistics, I mean in real terms, 1 out of 2 kids doesn't get a diploma, 50%. That's the real world. Mr. Bloomberg, let's settle this once and for all between the two of you. Is the dropout rate 50%, as your chancellor said?
Joel was wrong. He meant to talk about the graduation rate. The graduation rate was 50%. It's gone up to 54%. In the Bronx, it was 40%. It's gone up to 52%. But you know, Jay, what has happened here for 20 years, the elected officials did absolutely nothing for our children. They just said, we want to have better schools, but they never came up with any money, and they never tried to improve standards. I came into office and I said, give me control of the schools and I'll make it better. Hold me accountable. And when my opponent had the opportunity to do that for 19 years while he was in office, he did nothing. He didn't even talk about graduation rates until all of a sudden he's running for mayor. You can't have it both ways. Everybody knows one child not getting through is one child too many. But we've got to do something about it, and that's why we ended social promotion in the 3rd grade, in the 5th grade, and the 7th grade.
54% I'm guessing you're not proud of, though.
54% is the number that graduate in 4 years. A lot more graduate after 5, 6, and 7 years. Some kids go to other schools, and they're not counted in that number. In 4 years, 16% drop out, and 54% graduate, and the other 30% go on.
Mr. Ferrer, 50%, what is it?
Joe Klein's right. But even more than that, Mike, for you to pass the buck for a guy who was out of office for 4 years, but in office as a councilman, as borough president for nearly 20, and allocated millions to improve technology and libraries and school construction and school security, is beneath you. Look, it's a 50% dropout rate. 1 out of 2 kids without a diploma, without a future, without a job. We've got to do something about that. And the only way we do something about that is by improving teaching and learning in all the grades. Not teaching to a standardized test, but teaching to the highest standards. Improving pre-K programs and after-school programs, music, art, athletic programs, family literacy centers, building new classrooms and new school buildings to relieve the vicious overcrowding we see in high schools.
Isn't that what the
Some
mayor's
high
doing?
schools built for 3,000 who have 5,000
Isn't that
kids in them.
what the mayor's been doing, though? Doing those things you're talking about?
Then why do we still have a 50% dropout rate?
Mayor? We don't have a 50% dropout rate. He's just making up a number. That's the answer. Or he doesn't understand. Joel Klein misspoke. The dropout rate is 16%, much too high, but 16%. And let's get on with it. We are building classrooms, just as you said. We do have a music program back in, and we are focusing on making sure the kids get exercise. We've put standards in, we're holding everybody accountable, and the results are there, and we're just starting.
I've got a couple of questions. I've got a couple of questions on education requiring short answers. Do you favor, Mr. Ferrer, year-round school as a way of developing students who can compete with students from other countries, which have much more intensive educational programs?
Yeah, I think for kids who are struggling and need more time on task, extending the school year makes an enormous amount of sense, as does extending the school day and week.
Do you agree with that?
We're doing it. We have a summer school for those kids that we've identified need more help, and the new teacher's contract has an extra period, 4 days a week, for the kids that are struggling. Every class, every school.
But year-round means that, it's virtually 12 months with a few vacations in between.
The school with summer school goes almost all year round.
Okay, another short education question. Do you favor, Mr. Mayor, having military recruiting, making it easy for recruiters to operate in our schools?
If we allow businesses to recruit, we should allow the military to recruit. There's nothing wrong with presenting to our high school kids the option of going in the military in the same way as I've always thought they should have the option of knowing what jobs they could have.
Short answer, Mr. Ferrer.
No, I want our kids to get jobs. I want them to have the tools they need to be economically self-sufficient. They can make that decision on almost any street corner of this city.
Melissa Russo.
Gabe, thank you. Rents, subway fares, taxi cabs, food, energy, the cost of everything in New York City always seems to go up, never down. And we're going to hear now from a single mother in Lower Manhattan who has a question for you both about affordability.
How are you going to help the working class live in New York City? This is a city that's supposed to be for everyone, but it's really now for just the rich. And I want to know, what are you going to do to make certain that I, who live in the city and work in the city and am a parent in the city and I pay my city taxes, I can't afford to live here? What are you going to do about that?
Mr. Ferrer, this woman has a job, she has an apartment. What would you do to make her cost of living go down?
And she should be able to live in this city, but increasingly this city is becoming unaffordable to working and middle-class people. Let's review some of the facts. The working and middle class are being priced out of their own homes. Moderate income people can't find a decent place to live at a price that they can afford. That's why I put forward a plan to cut their taxes. Not a $400 rebate check on a discretionary basis every year, but a full tax cut, a permanent tax cut, and to give renters tax assistance as well, and to build and maintain the affordability of 167,000 homes for everyday New Yorkers, homes that they can afford.
Mr. Bloomberg, is that a good plan? Is that a better plan than what you're doing?
Mr. Ferrer wants to cut taxes, but he also wants to build affordable housing with tax revenues, so you can't have it both ways. I think you got to understand this is an expensive city. It always has been, probably always will be. What we've got to do is find ways so that people can afford to stay here. That's why I've fought against increases in the fares and the MTA. That's why I fought in favor of getting the minimum wage raised. That's why I fought to make sure that we are building affordable housing. We have an 86,000 unit program being built with capital dollars and private dollars, and we're better than halfway there. That's why I want to bring jobs here, because in the end, the best answer is a job for everybody.
Well, this woman, for instance, has a job already. She has an apartment. What do you think you'll be doing in the next 4 years if you're reelected that will help her? What can she see happen?
We've got to keep making this government as efficient as we possibly can. We want the services government provides. We want to keep the cost of those services as low as we possibly can. And that's why I've managed to cut $4 billion annually out of the city's budget over the last 4 years, and we can do more.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. David Ushery.
All right, Gabe, thank you. And while Melissa's question focused on the working and middle class, I'd like to get some specifics from you, gentlemen, about New York City's poorest of the poor. The Bronx is one of the poorest counties in the country, and that didn't happen overnight. And Mr. Ferrer, we'll begin with you because you mentioned your 20 years in elected office as a councilman, as borough president. Did you do enough to combat poverty then, and what will you do as mayor?
You mean working with 2 mayors and scores of community organizations to build 66,000 units of affordable housing, to turn a borough that most people left for dead into a place that, in fact, President Bill Clinton called a national example for urban renewal? Or you mean working with President Bill Clinton and getting small business programs in the borough to help build 34,000 good jobs for people? No, I'm very proud of that record.
Mr. Bloomberg, let me ask you, a number of experts say that a number of people have slipped into poverty over the last couple of years. You've talked a lot about those who have prospered under your reign. Do you have to take some responsibility for those who are not faring as well?
The numbers show that we are getting 100,000 immigrants from overseas every year. They typically come without formal education, and in many cases with not great command of the English language. And their earnings prospects at the beginning are problematic. That's why I've tried to focus on the kinds of jobs that they can get at the beginning. Travel, tourism, restaurants, hotels, those are the kinds of jobs that we have to bring to the city. We've got to bring construction jobs and open the construction unions up to everybody. And that's why I've negotiated a deal with the construction unions for the first time, a historic deal where they will open up a big percentage of their apprentice programs to immigrants and to people who've just started to work their ways up the economic ladder. That's why we have this new women and minority-owned business program where the city's business is now being given out to businesses started by people in every community. They'll get city business and they employ people from their community. So that's why we have to go and build things like the Atlantic Yards, and why we have to build the Bronx Terminal Market, and why we have to develop Willets Point. Those are the jobs for the future.
Jorge Ramos.
Thank you, Gabe. At this time, each of you is invited to ask the other a question. Mr. Bloomberg, you may ask the first question to Mr. Ferrer.
I guess I'd ask my opponent, New York Times and Newsday and the Post and the Sun and the Daily News and the Advance and OI all endorsed me. Do you think they're wrong?
Well, Mike, we've learned the hard way in the last couple of years that the New York Times doesn't always get it right. And don't even get me started on the New York Post. Look, I'm proud of the support I've gotten from the neighborhoods and streets of this city. So if I'm not the candidate of the people in the boardrooms, I'm proud to be the candidate of the kids in the classrooms of this city.
Mr. Ferrer, you may ask a question to Mayor Bloomberg.
Sure. Mike, you've said in the past that the poor get better health care in this city than the wealthy. Do you honestly believe those words?
What I was saying is I cannot tell you how proud I am of the progress that our public hospitals, our 11 public hospitals have made. It is true, if you go into those hospitals without any insurance, without any money, you will get the same care as if you can come in and pay for your services. And that care is the best medicine available any place in the world today. 30,000 people work in those hospitals, and they have transformed hospitals that people were willing to walk away from, wanted to sell, wanted to close, into 11 of the best hospitals any single place in this world. You betcha I'm proud of him.
Now let's go on to another important subject. Mr. Ferrer, you have declared you're against a major economic development project in Brooklyn, the Atlantic Yards. We went to Brooklyn and found this man with concerns about this project. Let's listen.
We're talking about Brooklyn, downtown Brooklyn, Atlantic Terminal area that comprises Prospect Heights and the Clinton Hill area of Brooklyn. I believe that that area is an area that needs to be revitalized. I believe that the arena, if built, will be an economic boost for the neighborhood. But I'm concerned about whether or not affordable housing will be a key concern if it is in fact developed. That is my major concern. Is it going to be an area that's going to have affordable housing for the residents of the Brooklyn community?
Mr. Ferrer?
See, I don't confuse economic development projects with billion-dollar boondoggles. In fact, this is looking more and more to me like the twin brother of the West Side Stadium boondoggle. Let me tell you some of the things that I have been impressed with in this project. 50% housing affordability. I thought that was powerful. A community benefits agreement that would include people from the community and small businesses in the full economic life of the project, but I have not supported the lack of transparency and the fact that there's been no planning for the kinds of mass of this project and the kind of infrastructure it would take to support it. But even more important, secret memos begin to emerge, like the one that says, we're going to give you Site 5 and we're going to use the city's condemnation power to take out existing businesses so you can create 2,600 units of luxury housing. Well, that breaks the 50-50%.
One of your allies, Reverend Sharpton, supports this project because it's going to create jobs. 45% of those jobs are set aside for minorities, which is what is needed in the area.
You know, it is amazing, Jorge, that we need boondoggle projects to try to do the right thing for communities and for people all across this city. Let's put them to work. Let's ramp up small business. Let's provide real job opportunities for them ongoing.
Mr. Bloomberg?
You know, you can complain about everything, but the real world is you have to go and do something. And the Atlantic Yards is a project that should go ahead. It will create affordable housing. It will create housing for middle-class people. It will create a great spirit in Brooklyn. It will give us commercial space. It will fill a void that's been empty since when they wanted to build a new Ebbets Field there. It will create jobs for this community. And if there's any project in this city that has been well studied and studied out in the open and that has worked with the community, one developer, if you have to pick one in this city, this developer is the developer you want to pick to make the neighborhoods blend in with the project and to really make sure that everybody benefits.
You look skeptical, Mr. Ferrer.
Yeah, I am skeptical. I mean, if everyone's reviewed this project, why are there secret memos emerging about the city guaranteeing to condemn a property called Site 5 that'll give this developer 2,600 units of luxury housing, by the way, with tax breaks from the city? That's nuts.
Your response, Mr. Mayor?
Well, if the memo's out, it's certainly not a secret, so I don't think we have to worry about that. Look, the city's investment in this is only $150 million. We'll get our money back reasonably quickly. The only thing we're doing here is the same thing we do for other projects. I have yet to hear one major development project in this city that my opponent is in favor of, Gabe.
I'll tell you one.
I'm
happy to tell you.
You'll have to save it. Melissa Russo has a question.
I'm curious now.
Give it a chance.
Well, we'll see if it's on Staten Island, because we're going to talk about economic development on Staten Island. Maybe you'll be able to work it in. But economic development can obviously be a good thing, and when it's uncontrolled, it can also have a serious impact on quality of life. We're going to hear from a mom on Staten Island right now.
Just what do you intend to do about the traffic on the secondary roads on Staten Island? The Staten Island Expressway is backed up from at all hours of the day, and the overflow is coming into the secondary roads, and they just can't handle it.
Mayor Bloomberg, do you have a plan?
We're down zoning an awful lot of Staten Island for exactly this reason. The truth of the matter is the roads are too small for the amount of traffic today. And if you allow building in many of the neighborhoods on Staten Island to continue at the pace that it's been doing, you will not be able to get a police car or a fire truck or an ambulance to your home. You won't be able to find a school that has classroom space. You won't have a sewage system or water system that can handle it. It's controlling development. Staten Island, however, is only one borough. in all 5 boroughs. Overdevelopment has become a very serious issue because we're building so much housing in this city. We've built 100,000 housing units in this city, and overdevelopment is becoming a very serious problem. This year, we're on track to have a record number, 30,000 housing units built.
Mr. Ferrer?
Okay, let's get this straight. What this woman is talking about is the lack of infrastructure planning on Staten Island. New houses built, but not enough schools, not enough roads, not enough space for people to get emergency vehicles down a road. By the way, that's going to be the same complaint around the Atlantic Yards because we're not doing adequate infrastructure planning there.
So on one hand, though, you criticize the mayor for not building enough housing, and on the other hand, you are criticizing him for the consequences of the development that has happened.
No. What I'm talking about is building affordable housing. Look, I don't confuse this with multi-million-dollar condos. Again, building affordable housing on sites that we already know, on sites in this city and on sites that can be upzoned in this city with a special investment from the city itself to induce 50% housing affordability. That's my plan.
Jay DiDapper.
Both said that you ride the subways a lot. The number 7 train is a favorite of a lot of people because it goes through so many great neighborhoods, so much good food to eat at every stop. We went out to Sunnyside to talk to a gentleman who rides the number 7 line who doesn't have quite as fond a perspective of it as perhaps those of us who go to Shea do.
How will you improve on the service that we're getting? Because I'm catching the 7 train and it seems like the trains are delayed all the time, and when they do come, they bypass the station to make up time. I don't think that's kind of right when people have to go to work. And you raise the fare up, I think the fare should be maintained.
I hate it when they bypass your stop at rush hour. I know the mayor, and I think this gentleman has a misconception that we all have at times, that the mayor runs the subways. And in fact, the MTA runs the subways. But Mr. Ferrer, you have called the 4 representatives on the MTA board potted plants several times recently that the mayor has put on that board. But let's do some simple math here. There's 14 votes. You get 4 of them. Why would you be able to do anything different than any other mayor? And probably a more important question, do you think that the subways should be taken over by the city again and taken away from the MTA?
Well, first of all, Mike Bloomberg's predecessor, Rudy Giuliani, used his 4 appointees to great advantage. And I disagreed with him an awful lot for the strap hangers of this city. Now, I know I'm going to be criticized again as not being a cheerleader of George Pataki, but excuse me, because I am not. Simple fact is we've had 2 fare increases in the last 4 years, and service has not gotten any better. At the same time, the MTA reports a nearly $1 billion surplus, and they want to get into the real estate business by building a platform over the Hudson Yards instead of making those investments back into the subway system to make it safe, reliable, and affordable.
What does the mayor have to do with that? He's only got 4 of the 14 votes. And do you think the subway system should be taken over by the city?
4 of the 14 votes and leadership and a bully pulpit, second in size and mass only to the President of the United States. That's leadership.
Should the subway be taken over by the city?
I don't think so. We've got to make the state and the MTA respond to the needs of our strap hangers.
Mayor, you've got 4 of 14 votes. You haven't been able to stop a fare hike. You've complained about it, but you weren't able to stop it.
We voted against it the last time. We couldn't stop it. I tried to use the bully pulpit. Hopefully we will not have one in 07. I've argued that we should use some of the surplus to make sure that does not happen. You know, though, I was thinking, when I came to this city in 1966, the subways were covered with graffiti. There was crime rampant. There wasn't any air conditioning, and they did bypass a lot of stations.
And they were run by the mayor.
And they were run by the mayor.
Do you want control of the subways?
When I first was running for office 4 years ago, I thought that this city should be in control of its own mass transit. Then along came 9/11 and the economics changed. The city could not possibly afford to do it on its own. And the MTA is all tied up with Metro North and the Long Island Railroad. It is a regional transportation plan. It's a regional authority, and everything that's done has to be done by convincing people outside of this city to go along with us.
But your compatriot in the Republican Party is George Pataki. You weren't able to stop the fare increase. He's a Republican. You're a Republican. Doesn't that diminish your argument that you can get things done because you're a Republican and Republicans run the joint?
Well, I don't always agree with Governor Pataki. I tried to get us a commuter tax, and I couldn't do it. but I did get a Democratic Speaker of the Assembly, and I did get a Republican Speaker, or Majority Leader of the Senate, to give us $2.7 billion over the governor's veto,
Mayor.
and then I sued to make sure that his veto did not stand up.
Mr. Mayor, just to stand on the historical record, the MTA was created to take responsibility or reliability or accountability away from the mayor and the governor at the time it was created.
The whole idea here was that the elected officials wouldn't be responsible, that they couldn't be blamed. And that's exactly the problem with our government that we've had for a long time, and that's what I'm all about. Hold somebody accountable. But unfortunately, we could not take over the subway system, and they wouldn't give it to us. We do provide security and do a great job in doing that.
Mr. Mayor, the New York Times, in endorsing you, we're changing subjects here, said that you were on your way to being remembered as one of the greatest mayors in New York history. But the Times warned that your chances of reaching that status were reduced by one flaw, what the Times calls obscene spending. Now, 4 years ago, you warned against obscene spending. How did you define obscene spending then, and how do you define it now?
Look, Gabe, what I'm trying to do is to get my message out to everybody, every community, every single person, regardless of where they live. I'm doing it by buying time on television and radio and in print, and I'm doing it personally by going out, what I've been doing for 4 years, spending all my time trying to get to every neighborhood in this city. The fact of the matter is we've brought crime down, we've improved the schools, we have the best affordable housing plan going. I've got to tell people what we've done, what we would do, and why they should continue.
Saturating the airwaves with that message?
Well, I don't know whether you saturate them or not. We're going to find out on November 8th. That's what elections are all about.
Mr. Ferrer, the fact that you're able to raise so little money comparatively, does that indicate that you're just not getting widespread support out there?
Well, you know, I can think of 100 million reasons why New Yorkers are misinformed about Mike Bloomberg's record. And that's okay. Look, it's his money and he can spend it any way he wishes, but it doesn't make it right. Now, you can buy all the TV ads, all the radio ads, all the print ads, but I don't think it's right to avoid debate in this city. Elections are for holding contestants accountable. And in fact, that's what debates are for. Mike, in 2001, you said that the public of this city was cheated by not having enough debates. Why won't you debate anymore this season?
You're debating right here now.
This is, unfortunately, the second and the final debate we'll have. That's awful. We should be having debates in every borough of the city. Mike, if you're proud of your record and if you're ready to defend it and you don't mind being held accountable, then debate me in every corner of this city. Come on, we've still got a week to do this.
David Ushery, unless you want to answer that, Mr. Bloomberg.
Having a debate about debates wasn't a good use of is not a good use of this time.
Mr. Bloomberg, over the past 10 days, David Ushery.
I'll take that, Gabe. Thank
you. That's your question.
That's right. Thanks. During the past 10 days, Mr. Bloomberg, you've outlined a number of new proposals on things including housing and health care. And some observers have said they look a lot like Mr. Ferrer's proposals. What I want to ask you is, do you think some of his ideas have merit? And if not, why do the proposals seem similar?
Well, he wants to build affordable housing, and so do I. The difference is I've got a ways to do it with capital funds. He's going to have to do it with raising taxes. But look, what I've tried to do over the last months as this campaign has unfolded is tell people what I've done and what I would do if reelected. They have a right to know. What are your plans? Would they work? How would we hold you accountable? How would we know that a promise made is a promise kept? Who's going to pay for it? And rather than worrying about just slogans and complaining and identifying problems, what I'm trying to do is to lay out a clear plan that everybody can look at. Your vote is too precious to just waste. You should know who you're voting for, you should know what they've done in the past, and you should know what they're going to do in the future.
But your housing plan for affordable housing plan had been out there for a while. Then in the last week or so, you expanded the numbers so that they match Ferrer's. It would appear.
What we did is we had a plan to build 86,000 units of affordable housing, funded by a variety of ways, not taxes. We are ahead of schedule on that plan, roughly 47,000 out of the 86,000 either under construction or completed. We think we have a ways with private monies, philanthropic monies to be at the beginning and then private monies to double the size of that. It happens to come out to roughly the same number.
Let me ask Mr. Ferrer, conversely, if there's such perceived similarities, Why should the voters change direction now?
Well, if imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, I'm flattered. But the simple fact is I've yet to meet a New York family who can live in a pipeline. Now, the number keeps on growing as the election draws closer. Thank goodness for elections. But again, we're in the middle of a housing crisis in this city, and it requires resolve, a serious plan, and a plan that can be funded. I've put forward all three.
Melissa Russo.
Thank you, Gabe. Mr. Ferrer, you have said that if you are mayor, you would not cut the police department nor services for senior citizens. You have not ruled out cuts, however, to the schools or the fire department. Now you've also promised to cut taxes. And as mayor, you would have to close next year a $4.6 billion budget gap. What would you cut?
You mean the budget gap in Mike Bloomberg's next budget?
Correct. If you're assuming that he's going to win re-election.
I'm happy. Well, perhaps some people are. I am not. It goes like this. There are important things we need to do to get this budget gap under control. And one of them is going to the governor, going to the legislature, and finally getting serious about ending the fraud, waste, duplication, and abuse in the Medicaid program that cost this city and its taxpayers several $billion a year. And here's another way to do it, as I proposed the other day, going again to the governor and the state legislature and said, look, we've had enough of this. We had a commuter tax in this city. I want it reinstated. That will give us more than $500 million a year of dedicated revenue to not only deal with that budget deficit, but also pay down budget deficits going forward.
Okay. Mayor Bloomberg, you always talk about how more and more of city spending is mandatory, things like pension costs and salaries that can't be cut. Your opponent is talking about getting money from elsewhere, revenue from elsewhere. You know, having been mayor for 4 years, you have to make cuts. What would you cut? And do you expect you'll have to make cuts?
What we've done is we've cut about $4 billion out of the expense budget, either by finding ways to do more with less or by finding alternative funding sources. That's why the quality of services in this city has actually gone up over the last 4 years. What we've also done is we've tried to get as much money as we can out of the federal and state government. Remember, it was the Democratic-led Assembly that ended the commuter tax. And we will not see that back, I don't think, for a long time. I have fought for it for 4 years. I will continue to fight for it. But the truth of the matter is the votes from the suburbs are sufficient to keep this city from getting a commuter tax. What we've got to do is be self-sufficient. And the ways to do that is to grow the economy so our tax revenues come in. That's from having big projects, from getting jobs here.
I haven't heard either of you talk about the answer to the question, which is what would be cut.
I said
whether anything,
I believe we can maintain the level of services that we have now and improve the quality of them without cuts. I will in my next budget.
Ramos.
I'll answer that question.
We have to go to another topic here.
Oh, I'm so sorry, because this was so good, because I can't let New Yorkers labor under the misimpression that Mike Bloomberg fighted for the restoration of the commuter tax for 4 years. That's not true.
Well, the thing is that you have been criticizing each other for the last 50 minutes. Fernando Ferrer, what about Michael Bloomberg do you most admire?
Here's the one thing I do admire. Mike Bloomberg did not go down the path of exacerbating racial tensions in this city. And as a New Yorker, Mike, I thank you for that. But at the very same time, you didn't do much about the fact that there are two New Yorks. And by the way, neither New York could afford your multi-billion dollar taxpayer-funded jet stadium.
This is about admiration for Michael Bloomberg.
I just expressed it.
Okay. At this time, Mr. Bloomberg, what do you most admire about Fernando Ferrer?
I think my opponent is a great family man, and I think he speaks Spanish better than I do, pero estoy aprendiendo.
Anything about his public service?
Most of it took place before my time, but from what I've read, he was in a position where he criticized the school system, but he never took the opportunity to fix it. Every child that's in high school today was in elementary or middle school when he was
mixed with other things. Katie Dapper.
Praise, perhaps. We had cases of it for both of you. Mr. Bloomberg, it was less than 3 weeks ago that you began pushing for a bigger role for the city at ground zero. There have been numerous reports over the years that you have had a tacit understanding with the governor that you would get the lead role on the west side where the stadium was going to be developed, and he'd get the lead role at ground zero. First of all, briefly, is there such a deal? Was there such a tacit understanding?
Never discussed it, never had the understanding, and we were part of what was done over the last 4 years downtown.
But you've got to admit that the governor is the lead down there. The Port Authority is controlled by the governor and acting Governor Cody in New Jersey, and the LMDC, the board is controlled by
3 years ago, I tried to get the Port Authority out. I tried to swap the city land under the airports for that site for exactly that reason.
Right. So, but in the last 3 years, with the exception of that at the beginning time, a lot of people say, where have you been for the last 3 years while you were doing the west side and while the governor was holding news conferences at ground zero?
We were part of the process that picked a master plan, a site plan. We were part of the process that picked a design for the memorial. We are not trying to walk away from this at all. What I've said is recently, if you take a look at the marketplace downtown, it may be shifting, and for buildings that we have not yet started, buildings 3, 4, and 5, we should take another look at what the plan called for, not where they are, but what they would be used for. I'm not sure that we should change, but the marketplace is the following. We've built 9,000 housing units have been built downtown just since 9/11. And if you go back and take a look at the need for commercial space, at the moment there does not seem to be the need for 10 million square feet of office space down there.
Okay, Mr. Ferrer, I got to get to you on this. You've criticized him for being missing in action at ground zero, but we have not heard from you a defined, detailed plan of what you would do differently at ground zero if you become mayor in January.
Yeah, you heard it in the last debate, but let me be even more specific now. First of all, talking about 9,000 units of housing, too many of them are multi-million-dollar condos, luxury rentals that we're giving them tax breaks for. That's nuts. We need affordable housing in the city, but let's talk very specifically about the hole that still is ground zero. We need to replace office space and commercial space. We need to have, before all of that, a fitting memorial, not only to the almost 3,000 New Yorkers who perished in that attack, but also to the hundreds of emergency service workers, police officers, and firefighters who perished.
That's underway.
And we still haven't seen one brick piled on another. We've waited 4 years. That's wrong.
Okay, now to the 1-minute closing statements in the order determined earlier by a coin toss. Mr. Bloomberg, Mr. Mayor, you're first, and then a last word from Mr. Ferrer.
I came to this city with nothing but dreams, and I've been very lucky. I was elected by the voters 4 years ago to run the city. It was a very difficult, tough time for the city. People were worried, people were scared. We pulled together. This is one city, and it's a city that I'm so proud of to lead and so proud of to be part of. I think if we continue to do what we're doing, make sure that every child gets a good education, if we continue the course of making sure this city is safe, safe from criminals and safe from terrorists, if we keep building and getting investment to come here and jobs to come here, then the future for this city is something that we will all look back on and say, we stood the test. I want my children to look at me and say, Daddy, you governed honestly, you governed fairly, you didn't report to anybody but the public that you work for. When you had the opportunity to do what was right, even when it wasn't popular, you stood up and do it. And I think that that's exactly what this city wants and will continue to have.
Time's up. Mr. Ferrer, you're 1 minute.
You know, Mike Bloomberg says that the city's going in the right direction. In some ways, that's true. But in too many other important ways, it isn't. Look, I was brought up on a tough corner of the South Bronx. What brought me from that tough corner to this podium tonight was crossing over a bridge built of hope and opportunity. I'm running for mayor for the millions of New Yorkers who are finding it increasingly tough to walk over the same bridge I did. I'm running for school kids and the education that they deserve, after-school programs, ending overpopulation, overcrowding in their schools, ending the dropout rate. Instead of teaching to a standardized test, teaching to the highest standards. I'm working to lift up from poverty and unemployment New Yorkers who need a good job, and that can be fueled by small businesses having access to capital and doing business with this city. Cutting the taxes of moderate and middle-income homeowners being priced out of their homes, and providing a bold housing program to build affordable homes for everyday New Yorkers. Look.
Time's up, Mr. Ferreira.
Well, I'm asking for your vote next week, and if you vote for me, I'll make you proud you did.
Thank you, Mr. Ferreira. David Ushery.
All right, Gabe, thank you. Thanks to the candidates, and we certainly hope that the viewers/voters have learned a thing or two about them. But this might help you as well. This is a voter guide. If you'd like to find out more information about all of the candidates running for office next week, the Campaign Finance Board has produced a multilingual New York City voter guide that you should have received in the mail. An interactive version of the guide is also available on the CFB's website, www.nyccfb.info. There's also a lot of interesting information about the candidates' finances on the website. So we hope you'll take a look at it. Once again, the website, www.nyccfb.info. Gabe?
Yes, thank you, David, and thank you, Fernando Ferrer and Michael Bloomberg, for joining us in this important debate. The program will be broadcast in Spanish on Telemundo 47 at 11 p.m. tonight, on the Korean channel 76 tomorrow at 9 p.m., and in Mandarin on Sinovision, channel 73, on Saturday, November the 5th at 9 p.m. Thank you to our panel, to the journalists here at Telemundo 47's Jorge Ramos, at WNBC anchor David Ushery, government affairs reporter Melissa Russo, and political reporter Jay Dapper. And for the viewers, thank you, too, for tuning in. And don't forget to vote on November the 8th. The polls will be open in New York City between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. I'm Gabe Pressman. Have a good evening.